Today I would like to talk about the strange death of Cardinal Pell. Those of you who don't know me, I am Catholic, but that doesn't mean that I am immune to corruption within the church. Quite the opposite. And for those of you who would answer this video by saying, "Well, no, Icky, that just shows you that how bad, that the church is always bad, so it's always been bad, it's always been corrupt, so just be Protestant, man." Well, it's my perspective that if the church is indeed the representative body that was established by Christ on the earth, which is, of course, something you either believe or you don't believe, it's an article of faith, but if it is so, then it would make perfect sense that this institution would get attacked more often by demonic forces, if you believe demonic forces exist, which again is one of those things that it's an article of faith. You believe it or you don't. But I believe it, and I believe it's happening in a particularly bad way in our day and age, perhaps worse in our day and age than it's ever happened before. But that doesn't mean, again, that the church's sacraments are negated or that the establishment of the church on earth is no longer valid. Because, again, there's always been corruption. There have always been things that are going wrong. There have always been bad people within the church, and that doesn't just apply to the Catholic Church. It applies to every church imaginable. It applies to every religious body imaginable. It applies to every institution imaginable. Anyway, that's maybe too long of a preface to all of this. But sorry, I wanted to share it anyway. My take on Cardinal Pell. First of all, just a thumbnail of Cardinal Pell and his tumultuous career within the Catholic Church. He is or was a cardinal out of Australia who represented one of the more conservative wings of the cardinalate. Is that how you say it? And or one of the more conspicuously conservative cardinals that are out there. He several years ago was given the task of looking at the Vatican bank, and apparently he found several things, many problems with the Vatican bank, much corruption in the Vatican bank. And he had been tasked to do this by then Pope Benedict XVI. Not long after this auditing of the Vatican bank, Pope Benedict XVI was forced to resign, which is something that I'm never going to believe that it just Pope Benedict, by the way, R.I.P. who recently died, and a pope that I'm very very sympathetic to and always felt simpatico with, as I've talked about in another video. But not to say that he was perfect, of course. He had his problems as well. But nothing compared to what we got in the seat of Peter right now, unfortunately. But that's another story. So after this auditing of the Vatican bank took place, not long after that, Benedict XVI resigned, supposedly because he was getting old and didn't feel up to the task of being Pope anymore. And it was a shock to everybody at the time. It was something that I didn't even know was possible. And I had been a Catholic for several years. I'd been Catholic minded for much of my life, had an interest in the church and its workings and its teachings for a long time. I never knew that you could just resign when you were the Pope, but then it turned out that there was precedent for it. To find the precedent, you had to go back, 6 centuries. That was the last time that someone just opted out or resigned and became a Pope Emeritus, which is what Benedict XVI became in 2013, and that was what he remained for almost a decade longer that he lived until his death on December 31st, 2022. So, anyhow, after Cardinal Pell did this very sensitive work of auditing the Vatican bank and found a lot of irregularities, a lot of problems, not only was Benedict forced to resign, but again, it's my thesis that maybe that I shouldn't say just categorically that he was forced to resign because I don't know that to be true. But I can't help but thinking that there were more reasons why he resigned besides his health and besides him just not feeling up to the task of poping any longer. That's just my feeling, and I'm going to hold on to that feeling because my hunch is that I'm correct about that. I also have hunches about Pope John Paul I, who was Pope for like 48 days or something like that in 1978 before he suddenly died. I'm never going to not think that was weird. I'm never going to not think that there was more to that story than what we're told. He gave way to Pope John Paul II, who reigned as Pope for a very long time, especially as pontificates go. So he took over in 1978 and was Pope until 2005, which is the time of his death. He'd been ill for a long time, but and was suffering the effects of Parkinson's. But he remained Pope until he died, unlike his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, who retired early in 2013. So here's the thing about Cardinal Pell. Not long after this analysis was done at the behest of Benedict XVI, this analysis was done of the Vatican bank. Cardinal Pell got slapped with a couple of charges of sexual abuse of minors. He disputed these charges, and it came out eventually that these charges were apparently quite spurious. There was not a logical consistency to them. They essentially, for them to be true, he had to be in a couple different places at once. He had to there was a charge of him being alone with a young man in a place where he was very conspicuous, but supposedly it was charged that he abused this young man in this particular place that again it seemed like in normal circumstances these are charges that would have gotten thrown out. However, there was a very aggressive campaign against Cardinal Pell, both in his home, what do they call them down there, district, province, because it's a very liberal province, but also one wonders if those elements within the church who have a lot of power and who are quite unscrupulous, if this was their response to him uncovering the things that he uncovered at the Vatican Bank, was to orchestrate this campaign against him, and to again to cause everybody to see him as this man who had lived, a long time, and hadn't had any charges registered against him up to that point. He suddenly gets slapped with these charges, which are, within the culture that of the Catholic Church, with the awful the saga of Cardinal McCarrick, a very, very high-ranking member of the church who clearly was a sexual predator, and many other cases, other similar cases that have plagued the church in recent times. It was hard for Cardinal Pell to get the benefit of the doubt, let us say, when it was just sort of like, oh, another churchman, another sexual scandal involving minors. What else is new? Of course, a lot of this I would maintain, and others would maintain, is anti-Catholic bias promulgated by the media, because you look at an institution like the church, and in fact, the instances of reported sexual abuse is much lower within the church than it is in other institutions like public schools. There are more public school teachers in America that are charged with sexual abuse than priests, and other priests, bishops, and other churchmen who have been accused of sexual abuse. But you don't hear this sort of calumny spread about public school teachers. You don't hear, oh, public school teacher, better watch out for him. He's probably an abuser, even though, again, the statistics are much higher. He is much more of a likelihood, he or she has much more of a likelihood to be an abuser than a priest. Again, you can I don't have the source on hand, but look it up. This is something I've heard several times from several sources, and I believe it to be true. So the problems within the church being what they are, the fact that there's any sexual abuse at all is, of course, awful. But again, it's been overblown. Why? Because we have an anti-Catholic media. That's part of it. But of course, I'm not blaming the media totally. There have also been many, many cases of abusive priests where the church has not handled the situation well. And that's been a blight on the modern church, certainly. Anyhow, Cardinal Pell eventually gets exonerated. He at first gets convicted of these alleged crimes, and then after a few months in prison, it's found that these charges are very likely spurious for the reasons that I've detailed before. Again, I don't have all the details here either, but I recommend that you look into it for yourself if you're not sure about what I'm saying, and come to your own conclusions. But let's just say, from my point of view, it's very suspicious that somebody investigating a corrupt institution, a corrupt and powerful institution within the church, the Vatican Bank, who came to the conclusion that there were a lot of problems, that it needed a lot of reforms. Right after that, he gets slapped with these. Right after that, Pope Benedict is forced to resign, or Pope Benedict resigns, and not long after that, Cardinal Pell, the one who was doing this work of investigating, of auditing the Vatican Bank, he gets charged with these horrific crimes, of which he is eventually exonerated, but probably not soon enough to rescue his reputation in the eyes of many, because to many people, anyone who's charged, especially if it's a Catholic priest, or Catholic bishop, they must be guilty. There is this anti-Catholic animus out there, and some of it's there for good reason. But again, there isn't the same kind of animus towards public school teachers, even though there's more reason to be suspicious of that particular group than of Catholic priests in general. The vast majority of Catholic priests are not guilty of these heinous crimes, but the ones who have committed them, are certainly certainly should be punished to the full extent of the law, and anyone who covered for them should also be punished. Don't get it twisted what I'm saying here. But most recently, just to bring things to the end of the story, most recently Cardinal Pell died, and under strange circumstances. Now, in fairness, he was an elderly man. He was 81 years old, but he went in for a hip replacement, which is something that elderly patients need. They go in for that kind of surgery often, and it's a fairly routine surgery. I don't know if I've ever heard of a fatality coming from hip replacement surgery, but that's what happens with Cardinal Pell. And this was just, I think, a couple of weeks ago. It just followed hot on the heels of the death of Pope Benedict. Cardinal Pell dies after getting a routine, what should have been a routine hip replacement surgery. Now, I don't know if there was an autopsy done. I haven't heard anything about that, but about whether there was or wasn't. But it certainly reminds me of the death of Justice Antonin Scalia. This was something that I remember way back in 2016. I remarked upon how Scalia, who was the main, conservative, then the main conservative voice on the Supreme Court, how he was found with a pillow on his face at this strange lodge, this sort of remote hotel for rich people that was owned by some prominent Hillary Clinton supporter, some prominent Democrat. That, to me, the fact that it happened, that they found his body in this way, and that they never did an autopsy, the fact that there was no autopsy done, again, I will never not be suspicious of that one. And I am also suspicious of Cardinal Pell's untimely death, given that it happened in this manner, where what should have been routine surgery, unfortunately, resulted in the Cardinal's death. Given what happened to him prior to that, given the context of the fact that he was the one investigating the Vatican bank, which seems to be just a hotbed of corruption and scumminess. R.I.P. Cardinal Pell, as far as I'm concerned. Again, those of you who have a problem with him because you think he must have been, the charges against him must have been true because he was a Catholic priest, and Catholic priests who are charged with child molestation are inevitably guilty. I don't know what to say to you. But seeing, I just hope that, even if you have an anti-Catholic perspective yourself, I would hope that seeing these things, in with the timeline that I've provided here, I would hope that would make something go off in your mind, like, maybe there's more here than meets the eye. Maybe this was a whack job. Maybe this guy was taken out by the mafia who runs the world. And I do believe that is so. I do believe there are powerful forces who run the world, who are not subjected to the rule of law, unfortunately. Call them what you will, the Illuminati, whatever. That's what I think. Pell. That's what I strongly suspect, anyway. So those are my thoughts on the subject. If you have other thoughts or feel differently or feel the same or whatever, something to add, please comment below. Thanks for watching.